Okay. Well, let's take the story up where we left. I've changed the board a little bit because there's no way to fit it all in. What we're working with now, of course, is the fact that, of course, God puts them out of the garden, right? And what does God do? God sets, remember what God does at the entrance to the garden? Yeah, he sets angels to guard the way, right? Now, of course, you're going to see this imagery again where? On the Ark of the Covenant. God's special presence, right, that rests at the Ark of the Covenant is overshadowed by what? Cherubim, right? And you have cherubim, and you have the image of cherubim worked into the furnishings in the tabernacle and the temple. And then, so you have this angelic presence, right? When you're connected to the special presence of God, it always appears. This imagery continues through the Bible, right? And so they're blocked off. The whole world is under a curse. Now, this should tell us something later, or at any time, when human beings are confronted with commands, what's going to happen? Right? I mean, we live under this illusion, and we talk this way, bizarrely, we talk this way as though each human being is kind of a redo of Adam, when that's not true at all. Right? Every human being born after Adam is born under a curse. And we know what happened in the garden, and so born under this curse and dying under this curse because of this curse and the death that flows from sin, because death and sin flow together. And so we're all born under this curse. We all feel the effects of the curse. We all die under this curse, all of us. It shouldn't be that surprising later when people are confronted with commands, what happens to them when the commands confront them, apart from anything else. Right? But we have this strange view, practically, and we talk this way as if every human being is just kind of a do-over. But it isn't. There's not one single human being, including God incarnate, who's a simple do-over of Adam. Because when Jesus comes, now sometimes people think, what are you saying? What I'm saying is this: Jesus doesn't go back to square one. Jesus comes into a world filled with sin and death and the curse as the second Adam. He doesn't just take up the world redone from the beginning. He takes the world where Adam left it and overcomes everything that Adam did and more. Right? So let's drop this idea. Let's drop this idea that we all sort of start off with this kind of, as some kind of clean slate. Every human being is born with a clean slate, and they kind of redo Adam, and then they just happen, of course they make Adam's same decisions, but they start off as if they're starting in the womb as a garden. It isn't. It isn't. The womb is cursed, and our births are cursed, right? And we're under a curse. And you can see that easy. Now we can really speed up now, right? I'm not going to be referring to as many texts for a little bit, but of course what happens immediately? Cain and Abel. Is it L-E or E-L? I can never remember. Somebody help me out. Thank you. Now it's forever on tape that I can't spell. But it's going to become really clear I can't spell all week. Cain and Abel. The relationship between people, it's really, really clear now because we know what happens, right? Abel comes before God, offers a sacrifice of animals. Cain brings this other sacrifice that God doesn't accept, and Cain kills Abel. But what happens when Cain kills Abel? Cain tries to hide from it, right? And then God, of course, curses him. But it gets worse. A descendant of Cain called Lamech, he kills people and brags. He boasts about it. He boasts about how many people he even makes up a song about all the killing he does. Right? So the human race is not getting better and better every day and in every way. It's spiraling down. And it continues to spiral down. Now you have, along the way, these markers, like Abel. and then another one. You know what I'm thinking of? Enoch. Enoch, this character from the Old Testament, right, from Genesis, who was righteous and was taken up into heaven. We don't know much more about him, but that's really in some ways all we need to know. Because there is this development of this idea of there being a remnant on the earth. And so you have Lamech, things keep getting bad, and then you get this refrain that the thoughts and intentions of their mind and heart are what? All evil, all the time. That's God's verdict, right? And so you come to Noah and the flood. So God brings a flood on the earth. And out of this curse, out of this wrath, God saves 8 people, right? Now, it's important, especially if you ever study 1 Peter, to remember this, that they weren't saved by water, right? This is a big misinterpretation of 1 Peter often about baptism there. It has nothing to do with being saved by water. They're saved from the water, right? That's the image of baptism in 1 Peter. It's not the water that saves. The water kills. That's what the water did in the flood, right? The water is a sign of death, right? And Noah is saved from it in the ark. Noah is brought up from this wrath of God poured out in the flood. Noah and his family are saved. Now, of course, Noah comes up and God says, I'm going to establish my covenant. And what does God say to Noah? It's one of the first things he tells him to do. Be fruitful and multiply. You have a repeat of the command to Adam. And things look pretty good. They've come out, they've been saved, there's been the flood, the world's been washed clean, as it were. And you have Noah and his family, and you have 3 sons, and God tells them to be fruitful and multiply. God makes a promise, right, not to destroy the world. Now I got to get rid of my little thing here. God makes a promise not to destroy the world by water ever again. And he sets a sign of this covenant, right, in the sky, the rainbow. But it doesn't take long before we find out it's not going to stop here either. Because it's not long before they're on land again where you have an act of sin by Noah's sons, right? Shem, Ham, and Japheth, right? But nevertheless, you have 3 sons, and for our purposes, you have a son called Shem. And Shem is going to figure prominently in the Bible. Because Shem is going to be the father of a whole bunch of people, who is the father of Abraham, who's the father of a whole bunch of people, who is the father of David, who is the father of a whole bunch of people from the exile, who is finally the father of Joseph, who is the father of Jesus. Right? It all starts back here with Shem. It's going to take some strange turns, as we'll see in a couple of days, maybe probably tomorrow. It's going to take a strange turn in Genesis, in the Joseph story. All of a sudden you're going to have a story in the middle of the Joseph story that's all about a descendant of Shem, that is Judah, right? If you ever noticed before, but the Joseph story is interrupted by a whole chapter about Judah. Why? Because something really important happens there. It establishes a line in the Bible. That's why. And you get the inclusion of a Gentile in a very important genealogy. You have a Gentile now in a genealogy that's going to lead to, right, which was the son of Joseph, right, who was the son of God. And you're going to have Gentiles included. But that's for a different day. So anyway, you have Shem and Ham and Japheth, right? And we won't go into all the details. And things look, well, okay, maybe we're going here. But then you have, as is always true, an important genealogy. Now, what do you do with genealogies in the Bible? Usually we treat them like this. If you're doing a daily Bible reading plan, you got a genealogy, you're set. You're golden. You got a couple minutes, you're done. Right? Because you can cover, you got to read Chronicles, the first few chapters. I'll do it all in a day. Now just, sort of skid right through it. But the genealogies are there for a purpose other than to make our daily Bible reading fast. Really, they are. The genealogies serve incredibly important historical redemptive purposes. They do. To ignore the genealogies is really to say, I'm not really interested in how those are functioning. They function really importantly. As we'll see, Genesis is full of genealogies. The last book of the Hebrew Bible is what? Of the Hebrew Bible? 1st and 2nd Chronicles, filled with genealogies that start with Adam and go to what? The end of the exile. That's how it's set up. We'll take a look at that order in the Hebrew Bible, the canon of the Hebrew. The order in the Hebrew Bible, we'll take a look at that tomorrow or maybe even later this afternoon. These genealogies are extraordinarily important. Now, something happens, though, in chapter 11. And if you've ever taken Greek or Hebrew, you felt the punch of it. Babel. Now, let's just summarize it. What happens? All the people on earth are living in one place. And it says they decide to make a name for themselves. And so they build this big tower. And it says specifically why they're trying to do it. To make a name for themselves. What is it? What's this indicate? It indicates that what you have is the human race establishing themselves and making a name for themselves apart from God. There's no mention of God in all this. It's let's build ourselves this tower up to the heavens and make a name for ourselves. And they're all gathered in one place. And God says, this will not happen. And God comes down and does what? Yeah, He confuses their speech. And what does this do? It does many things in the Bible. One is it increases the chasm between people. Right? You want to explain wars and all kinds of stuff? There you go. You want to explain the pain of learning biblical languages? Here you go. When my Greek students complain, I'll just say, you know what? You shouldn't have built that tower and we'd all be fine. It doesn't help them. It makes me laugh. It makes them angry. But nevertheless, it's still true. Right? Because if you want to separate people, what do? You give them different languages. If they have different languages, they develop different cultures. If they develop different cultures, they have different sorts of societies, different sorts of values, different sorts of things they live for. And they're separated out through the face of the earth, right? So it's a curse. But go into all the world and make disciples of all people. Revelation 7, behold, there were people there from every nation, tongue, and tribe. This is where the nations are created, right here. And God uses this event so that one day there will be a chorus of voices of every nation, tongue, and tribe singing His praise. Not just from one group, but from every group. This is where the nations are created. And it's the nations that are going to play a big role in one of the descendants of Shem coming up pretty soon. And the nations are going to play a pretty big role in Matthew 28 and in the rest of the New Testament. But here's where it begins. Because you have these dual threads of God and what God's doing and the creation of a people. All the way from the beginning. All these things are constantly happening back and forth and intertwining. So you have the creation of the nations, which is connected to this curse. God curses them with various languages. He confuses their language. Right? So, just when you thought, here we go. It's looking okay. It gets worse in the Bible. And now it looks as bad as it can be. Because everybody's scattered. What's the hope? Well, all of a sudden, in the midst of this, you get a genealogy, the descendants of Shem in chapter 11. Now, we won't read the whole thing, but there is something really extraordinarily important that comes in. We'll start with verse 27 one of Shem's descendants. Now these are the records of the generations of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his birth in Ur of the Chaldeans, right? Modern-day Iraq. Abram, and Nahor took wives for themselves. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. And if you've never noticed it before, highlight verse 30. This is an amazingly important verse in the history of redemption. Sarai was barren. She had no child. Abraham's genealogy comes to a crashing halt right there. That's it. If you're reading this along and you're thinking, and let's pretend we're reading it for the first time, this is done. We're finished. Right? Whatever this guy was going to do or might have done, he's not going to do. There's an exclamation point set here. We're not told this just as a matter of historical curiosity and cleverness. What this does is it sets up everything that's about to happen for the next several decades. The other thing that happens here is, think about how much time has elapsed from Genesis 1 to Genesis 11. How much? Centuries, right? The next, from chapter 12 to chapter 24 and following, is going to be the span of a few decades. The Bible's going to really, really, really slow down. And the reader, a good reader of narrative, will note it. That we just bolted in 11 chapters from the creation of the world for centuries in 11 chapters, and now we're going to slow down to a couple of generations and cover more chapters than that. And again, a good reader of narrative takes note of that and sets up and pays attention, and then communicates it and preaches it accordingly. Right? So this is where this is sort of where it all begins, and the story slows down to get our attention. Why? Because God is getting ready to act. And the stage is set. God's going to act in the face of hopelessness. That is, a world in chaos, and some guy, Abram, who lives out where? Among the nations. That's where he is. This chapter in the history of redemption begins among the nations with some guy who is no more important than any other guy on one level, because Abram's just an idol worshiper. That's what they do over there. That's his claim to fame. His dad and his dad before him worshipped idols. And they lived way over there in the Fertile Crescent. Pretty nice place to live, but that's where they lived. Right? Now there are some Jewish traditions that talk about Abraham burning his father's gods and preparing himself and searching for the living God. The Bible says not a word about that. In fact, Joshua will say, "You going to obey God or be like your fathers across the river, worshiping idols?" Who's he talking about? He's going all the way back. So that's who Abram is. Abram is, in this level, on one level, just a man. Nothing special about him except he's a man out among the nations. And that's where it starts. See, what's happened here is you've gone, and this goes through the whole Bible. You move from specific, right, out to general, and then it gets S-P-E-C-I-F-I, specific. I'm really kind of gummed up here. To general, and now it's going to move to specific with Abram. And the whole, yes?
I was wondering basically, because you see the line of promise goes from Shem to Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
There really doesn't seem, in Abraham, the time he's called to worship the true God. Basically, the line of promise is to worship God.
Well, it's just the Bible's silent about it. Other than we know that Abram's family that they're worshiping idols. And that's all we know. We know that Abraham's just out among the nations. And yeah, he's in the line of Shem, and you do have worship, but the text is pretty silent about that idea. what it does say, though, is that they're living out there in Ur, and just with all their families. And there's really nothing said in here about sort of any kind of preparation of Abram. It's really more. Do you see what I'm talking about? I mean, I think that's a consideration. The question had to do with this line from Shem, whether or not true worship had fallen off or not. It appears that it had. Now, could there be? Yeah, there may well have been, but it's just in the way the narrative unfolds, we're not giving really an indication of that. Does that make sense? And so, but again, I think the big emphasis here, either way, is that God's getting ready to act in this sort of hopeless situation. That's a good question, though. But it always moves back, and it's going to keep. This could be a problem. It's going to keep moving back and forth, general to specific, till it finally gets really specified on one man. And then through that one man, what's going to happen? The calling of the nations. Right? And so that's how the whole Bible flows back and forth. And when you're interpreting the Bible, it's important and good to know, what sort of ebb and flow part you're in as you're reading the text. Right? And again, I think that this can open up the Bible in new ways for us if we're really attentive to it. So let's just go a little bit further. So it's all about, they leave Ur, they go to Haran. Terah dies in Haran. And then all of a sudden, there's a voice. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families or nations of the earth will be blessed." Well, quite a dramatic event. God's acting. And God's acting in the life of a man who has a wife who can't have children, and God comes and says, "Guess what I'm going to do?" And He promises him what? Just say it. A nation. He's going to be a great nation. What do you need, pretty much, to be a great nation? You're going to need some children there. But we already know in the history, in the flow of the text, that can't happen. Sarah is barren. And God confronts him and says, "You're going to be a great nation." And not only that, all the nations, I just called you from the nations, you're going to go to a special land. God is establishing Abraham in a special place to be a special God to him, to be God to him in a particular, in a very personal, relational way. That's what I meant to say. And he's going to establish him there and establish his children there eventually. It's going to be a long, long time of waiting in the meantime. But God says, "And through you, all those nations that were created and cursed at the Tower of Babel, they're all going to be blessed. Through you. Through you and your seed." And again, now we're talking the big major theme, right? Because you have a promise to where's the promised line? Down here. You have nations and blessing through Abram. And that's basically who we are right now. When we soon we'll take up this story of the long wait of Abram. How old's Abram here? Does anybody know? Not yet. He's around 75. And how long till he gets a child? More than 25 years. God's going to reinforce the promise in 25 years. Right? But God's going to come and then he's going to have the child after 25 years elapses. That's what I was trying to say. So the child's going to come, but not for 25 years of waiting. And something else is going to happen. God's going to confront Abraham and make a promise that cannot be broken, because the promise is going to be established on the basis of a word that can't be broken. And that's the chapter of this history of redemption we'll look at next.